we're finally here. If someone can confirm in the chat that you can see and hear both Emilys. We had this hilarious backstage where I could see and hear Emily. And she couldn't see and hear me. I felt like a ghost. Yeah. Okay. Welcome. I'm so excited to talk about this book. Yay. And Lauren and Julie have confirmed. Emily, do you want to introduce yourself first as my guest?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I am the other Emily. Emily and I worked together in Texas. What was that? Like 12 years ago. And I now live in Denver, but Emily and I lead all these fun travel trips together around the world, which is great. But outside of that, my day job, as I like to call it, is that I am a history teacher. So that's what I do up in Denver.
Yay. I'm making a little poll right now because I want to get a sense of how many people here have fully read the book, how many people are like halfway through, and how many people are like, I'm never going to read this long book, which is totally fine too. So yeah, tell me, you were the one who told me about this book. You were reading it on one of our trips.
In Egypt, yeah.
You were reading it in Egypt, and it had been on my list to read. And so I decided to motivate myself by making it my book club pick.
Yes.
And I'm really glad I did, because I will be totally honest, I don't think I would have read or finished this book if it wasn't for the book club. But I loved it.
Okay, because I'm excited. I know that the last time that we talked, you were like, "This too much. This too slow. The world building is taking too long." But then I was like, "At the end, just wait."
I finished this book at like 11 p.m. last night because for those of you who have read it, you know, like this is like fun facts and backstory, and then all of a sudden there's like plot. Whoa. So yeah, so that's why I wanted to see the poll. To see, okay, the people that have responded said yes, they finished the books. I mean, I do want to say, like, spoiler alert, we've read the book. We're going to talk about whole things. I did think we could organize it. I kind of had 3 different topics. I have like the history within this book, like what do we already know and what did we learn or find interesting about the history of this book, and then just like the themes, have our little English teacher moment, like what did we think this book was about. And then maybe there's a few plot points. So I think maybe at the end can be our like, oh my God, what do you think about fill in crazy plot points?
Great.
Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
So again, you've been warned, we might spoil the book right away. But that's not like our intention. It's just to go over the whole plot. So yeah. I guess I'll start by asking you, I have lots of notes and I wanted to share. Anyone in the chat, please share in the chat. I'm also like down to try out for this time if anyone wants to unmute, and like if anyone has any thoughts based on something me and Emily say that you want to add to. It might take a second to figure out the technicality of that, but I'd love to try it. So I think there's a feature where you can like raise your hand. I believe that's correct. But also just be super active in the chat either way. So Emily, just tell me what would be your pitch of this book to someone who hasn't read it? Tell me like what's kind of your review and your pitch to other people.
The pitch that I will give you is the reason why I was given this book. So I was given this book for my birthday by my best friend Megan this year. And she said, Emily, it's about etymology, history, and friendship, and you will love it. And it is about all of those things. Like it is truly about, I love etymology. I love the history, like the woven in opium wars, England, like on expanding its empire. And then like the friendship that's built between the main 4 characters mainly is really beautiful. And like the last moment at the end with Robin and, oh my God, what's his best friend's name?
Victoire, Robin
and Robbie. And like, I just love it so much. I have also recommended to 2 of my students who have already read it and have loved it.
Yeah, it's a little bit, I mean, I can see how some young people would like it. It's like dark academia sort of vibes, right? With a sprinkle of magic, as Cynthia said. Yep. I have a whole thing in my notes that just says, I love Rami.
I love Rami.
So we'll talk about that. I love Rami. Okay, I'll go ahead and say this is one of my questions at the end that is not really a spoiler because it never gets answered. But are they in love? I want Rami and Robin to be in love, right?
Yes, They have to be in love. There was this one line at like the very end when he's like reflecting on like their friendship right before everything's about to crash. And I'm just like, this is, yes, they are in love.
Yes, right. They're definitely a little in love. There's something going on that's really beautiful. And I think he says like, oh, okay, let me find my notes because I have so many little quotes. I did my little it's like I've known you forever, said Robin. And then Rami said, I think it's because when I speak, you listen.
Yes, that's the one that I was thinking about. Like, they're totally in love. I love it.
And that, like, Rami was never into Lety. And I was like, Anyway, I just, and not that is like such a subplot, but I bet there's so much fan fiction out there already about the two of them.
Yeah.
And I like Cynthia saying it doesn't have to be romantic love. It's like, but there's a deep love there between the two of them that is not between like him and Lety or even him and Victoire. Okay, yes. I'm so glad we're in agreement on this. Great.
I think that's something else that I really appreciated about this book is that it was not like it was more so centered around that kind of friendship or that kind of relationship versus it could so easily be like, oh, look, this cute couple falling in love and this thing happening. And it wasn't, which I thought was wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, let's put history teacher hats on. For me, the reason why I love historical fiction is when it helps me better understand real things that I've taught about, right? It helps me like humanize events that I teach about as like bold words in the book. And so obviously like we've both taught a lot about the Opium Wars and that sort of thing. And I mean, yes, it was interesting, but to me, I wrote so many notes about like free trade and like and like the philosophy of free trade and how it really is just a cover for Westerners to do whatever they want in the name of freedom. And like, it's a thing I knew, but man, it came up so much in this book where it was like, well, you're for freedom, right? So you're for free trade. So you're for, so then we're going to justify all these terrible things we're going to do. And it like humanized it. It was like in these very specific moments where even I was getting convinced. Like one of the professors would make an argument and be like, so what? We should just generously give all of our silver away to people who need it, even though they haven't done any of the work themselves. And what we should just like, that's not how the world works. And I remember being like, yeah, that makes sense. But I'm against it. But like, I can see how that's such a compelling argument. Anyway.
Yeah, I thought that the author did a really beautiful job of like one of the quotes that I wrote down of like explaining the great contradiction of colonialism. Because like she did a really great job of playing both sides of why England felt this way in real life. Obviously, like yes, in the magical world with the silver, but then also making the reader think, oh no, but this I get it, but I don't get it, just like what you were saying. And I thought she did a beautiful job of towing that line.
Yes, and it felt like to Kelly and Cynthia, there were parts of this as a white woman attempting to speak truth to power in 2024. I was like, oof. There were multiple times in this book that I literally just wrote oof off to the side. So I was like, yep, there are some truths about Lety that I was like, oof. So, and one that was another part of this that was really relatable is he's talking to Professor Lovell, his spoiler alert, dad. And man, was this relatable. Lovell says, are we obligated to share silver with everyone equally? Why should we? They can build up their own translation centers. And it says, Robin opened his mouth to reply, but could think of nothing to say. There was something wrong with this argument, but once again, he could not figure out what. And I was like, oh, that's me with my dad every time. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Or me with like the smart like poli-sci kid in my class who can like make this really good argument. And I'm like, wait, you're wrong, but you sound right. But I can't quite figure out why you're wrong because it sounds really good. Oh, so good.
Yeah.
Okay, so a few things then about they kept mentioning Adam Smith because I think it's really important for us to remember that like Adam Smith wrote his Wealth of Nations like 50 years before the events of this book, right? So it's interesting to me, and I'm curious because you teach European history, it's interesting to me to think about a world where capitalism is a new idea. And like, It is in some ways, like the way I've taught it, it's part of the Enlightenment, right? It's like, wow, we're for freedom in all these other ways. So free trade. And you see that in the book, and it seems like such a positive thing. I don't know. I don't know what I want to say about that. I just want to say it because I think it's interesting.
Well, so this is extra fun because in my world geography class this last week, I taught industrialization and we're teaching imperialism this next week. And I mean, obviously, I just totally lost my train of thought. Like Adam Smith's capitalism. Oh, and yeah, this idea of free trade. Because early on, you could be like, this is so, like, I get it. Like, this is so beneficial. Of course, you want to make, like, get all the silver and have free trade so that you can make more money and, like, improve your society. But I think
so much better than mercantilism, right? So much better than mercantilism or other, like, unfair systems. It makes sense.
But I think she, again, positions this book at a really beautiful time in history because it is so early into that industrial capitalistic world that they're not, like, you know, Victoire and Rami and Robin are maybe starting to see the effects of that, but then they don't actually know. I mean, they end up obviously shutting it down with how the book ends, which we don't have to spoil just yet. But I just think it's a really, the author does a really beautiful job of talking about what it would have been like in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. These, like, living in this moment of transition, which again feels very timely. Living in this moment where there's even a part of the book where it was like, oh, when I came to Oxford a few years ago, I had to take the, like, carriage and it took me 10 hours, but now I get to take the train and it takes me 3 hours. And I was like, oh, right. Someone experienced that in their lifetime. Of course we did. Like, I didn't have the internet and then I did have the internet. So it's like living in this time of transition and not knowing how it's going to end is, yeah, really fascinating. And the fact that the other thing I liked as a historian was her theme of, like, empire is unsustainable. Like, from the beginning, the moment you create an empire, it's gonna fall apart at some point because it, like, has to feed on itself. Like, it has to keep growing to work. And so, like, there was a quote here where it says, what did it say? Silver gilded London was near to a reckoning, for the day would come when it either devoured itself from inside or cast outwards for new delicacies on which to feed. And I then put in the side, I put Romans, Inca, like I was thinking about all these different empires where I'm like, yeah, the Romans, they're like, well, we have to pay our soldiers, so we pay them with land. Well, now we have more land, we need more soldiers to defend the land, right? And it's and the Inca too, right? The Inca were like, well, I need my own empire to, like, conquer and rule in my death, so I need to gain more and more and more and more. It was so good.
This is, like, maybe getting a little bit ahead into the literary analysis section of the book. But, like, using language, like the way that she used language and the translation of the language as a tool to analyze the empire, I thought was so brilliant. And how throughout the entire book, all of her translations was all about how language is so linked to exploitation. And there were all these, like, little tiny bits along the way. Like, obviously he just had Robin as a kid so that he could then use Robin's, like, Mandarin and Cantonese in order to benefit himself. But then there were even sections when they were talking about, like, how people started not using the French language because it, like, wasn't as good anymore. And then how, like, English people are intentionally, like, downplaying Gaelic or Welsh languages because they want to build up the language of just their empire. It was so good.
Yes. Under themes for me, I just have in bold the power of words. It's just, like, I think if I had to write an English paper about what is, like, the core theme, it would be that. And then I, like, have all these sub themes. So this was, I think, my favorite discovery when I zoomed out after I finished the book is, like, his name. Emily, have you thought about this?
Emily, Robin's name, Victoire's name. Oh, let's talk about this forever. Let's go.
Okay,
you first.
So the fact that I was looking through my notes and it was like when he first meets the professor and the professor's like, you need to pick a name. Okay. And he says, I have a name, said the boy. No, that won't do. No Englishman can pronounce that. So he picks Robin Swift. And then he's talking to the professor too on that same page. And he says, family names were not things to be dropped and replaced at whim, he thought. They marked lineage. They marked belonging. But Professor Level said the English reinvent their names all the time. So he's immediately, it's like a cultural thing. He's like, wait, my name in Chinese culture, like, my name is everything. My name is my family and my filial piety and whatever. And Level's like, whatever. You change names all the time. And what I wrote underneath when I reread that line about, like, I have a name, said the boy, is we never know his real name.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how the book ends, Emily?
How does the book end, Emily?
With him, well, spoiler alert, him seeing his mother again, and it says, and she said his name.
Yep.
Oh,
I know.
It was so good.
Oh, okay. So the name Robin, what did you interpret from that?
Well, I didn't really look too much into this. It's a character, right?
Yes.
It's a character in, like, is it Gulliver's Travels? Or no?
Yes.
Or Swift is?
It's I don't remember. But
He picks it from literature, though. But okay, what about the name Robin? I haven't thought. Is there some symbolism? What?
Oh, so I interpreted it not as a like bird robin, but like robbing, like he is robbing his culture in order to benefit like England and all of the empire, right? He's like living in the two worlds, but he is like taking things from both of them in order to serve the master when he's at Oxford.
Ooh, okay. Or it could be like a Robin Hood. But I do think there's something to like being a bird in a cage. I think there's something to like, she talks a lot about a gilded cage is still a cage, and like Rami calls him Birdie. And like he doesn't like it when Lety calls him that, but he's okay when Rami calls him that. Like, again, if I were writing my English paper, I think I'd go with the bird as a symbol, just because it is like, oh, he's this beautiful bird that gets taken from his exotic location and brought back. And then he's like let out of the cage.
Yes, that also works. Works on so many levels.
They do mention Robin Hood a few times. You're right. And Robin came from a nursery rhyme. Yes, there's probably lots of things. But yeah, the fact that I didn't realize through this whole book that I never learned his original name broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
That was so effective. Even when he was meeting Lin, the commissioner who like burns all the opium, who's a real guy that I remember learning about in Chinese history. He's a real badass. When he's like, what's your name? And he says Robin Swift. And he's like, no, what's your actual name? And it's like he almost can't remember. And then he never gets a chance to even tell him. I'm like, oh my God, we never. Oh. Anyway.
Yeah.
What'd you think about, like, what were you thinking, like, Victoire's name?
Oh, I thought there were some things that I thought that the author did so well about building character development. And there were some things where I was like, well, you could have just like very straightforward, very obvious. And Victoire was one of them because she's from Haiti. So first off, of course, her name's going to be Victory. And then, of course, she's going to be the one out of the four of them that makes it out.
Yes.
Like that was all like, as soon as I met her, I was like, okay, so she's going to be like the one that comes away.
Oh, I did not notice that at all until you just said it. Yeah, I want to talk, and this is where we'll leave it maybe to the end, because it's like the big plot point of the end of like how the four of their fate, the four of them.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting in thinking about like, what would be my fate? What is the like desirable fate? And I think that's really interesting. Before we get into that, a few other things about language that I thought was really interesting is like language was, I'm just going to read some quotes. Language was always the companion of empire. Charles V said, the more languages you speak, the more men you are worth, which totally makes sense, right? And then there were two things that I thought were super interesting beside the names. One, when Robin is getting called a slur, he has to like tell himself it's just a word, which I thought was really ironic, right? He's like, as long as he told himself it was only words Pendennis had hurled his way, words that meant nothing at all. And it was like, ooh, but his whole life is like that words are so important. So he can't like turn that off when someone calls him a terrible word. And same thing when Lety says like, well, Victoire's so civilized. Like she's not into voodoo and like Haitian religion. She's civilized. And I think Robin's like, that's a really loaded term. Just like that. If words matter, then they matter all the time, you know? You can't pick and choose when they matter. And that I loved when they were my favorite part of the book, I want to know your favorite section. My favorite section of the book is when they're in the like old library making the pamphlets. That's my favorite part.
Why?
Because I love seeing the logistics of a rebellion. Like give me the boring logistics of like, yeah, I guess we got to call up this guy and see if he'll change his vote to this thing, and like the bureaucracy. But I love when he was talking to maybe it was Anthony about the pamphlets and how he should word it. And I'll just read this quote and then I want to hear your thoughts. He said, use terms like scandal, collusion, corruption, cast things in terms that the average Londoner will get worked up about, and don't make it an issue of race. You want me to translate things for white people? Said Robin. Exactly. So again, that like the importance of using the right words to get people to like come to your side. I thought, when I put it all together in my notes, I was like, wow, this was brilliant.
Yeah, she did such a fantastic job writing this book. I loved, going off of the language piece, how they always talked about how there's something lost in translation, right? Like that's what allows the silver to work together. But when you think about that, layered into everything that was happening in the book, and even with what you were just saying, when you translate from one language to another language, like you're always missing something. And the way that even like we have to translate the way that we speak to other people based on their background, based on their perspective, they might not receive that we intended, or vice versa. And I just think that that is so beautiful that we can try our best to communicate in ways that accurately express what we feel, but we always fall short somehow.
And spoiler, that's what leads to the ending, is like trying to translate the word translate is the thing, right? It like that it doesn't work. It's like you can't, even the idea of translating means something different in every single language. Whoa.
And that's why I think my favorite part of the book, the library, was yours. Every time they talked about etymology and what a word meant and what it could, like what they were trying to figure out that pair word for, that was my favorite. I just thought I learned so much about the hidden words.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I loved like the idea that the magic was like you had to be able to like think and dream in that language and like fully inhabit it. And this is a little bit unrelated, but someone in the chat posted this earlier, that I also loved the realism of them building in like maintenance fees, of them building in like planned obsolescence. Like, how can we make sure we're needed? Because we speak the words once and it's like, oh, well, we'll make sure they're going to fail, so everyone's going to need us. And again, it's like, it's unsustainable. You're like building it to fail. Oh.
Yep. I know.
It's very smart.
Hold on, let me look at my notes real fast while you talk about other things, because I think I had a couple more things on language.
Yeah, and I'm going to scroll through the chat too. Feels like Apple. Yeah, I mean, so much of this felt so timely. Like in my mind, I'm going, yeah, like this could be about, 200 years from now, this could be about AI and the internet, and like we're in this new, like there's this magic with essentially artificial intelligence that's like starting to fuel things that we don't understand. And like, are we putting ourselves out of like work? Are we creating ourselves, making ourselves into this like obsolete thing by just like pushing for progress without even considering I just thought it was like freaky though. There were parts of it where I was like, oh, this is stressing me out.
When did you write this?
Like last year.
Relatively recent? 2022, yeah.
Yeah, 2 years ago. Okay, I have lots of other notes. Do you have anything in your notes you want to bring up?
Not related to what we've been talking about yet. So you're welcome to keep going. This is great.
Well, I think that, let me see. The power of words and names. And okay, the other ones I had was more about like being complicit. Like I wrote
Emily!
Complicity. Did you write the same thing?
Well, no, but I pulled out a couple quotes that deal with that. So keep going.
What's a quote you pulled out?
Sorry, I'm trying to find it. Hold, please. You go first.
Okay. Totally. So I wrote like complicity, like, which I don't know if that's a word, complicitousness. I don't know. But I thought it was really interesting. Like the very beginning of the book, he has this first test where he is brought and it's like, hey, he's trying to get on the ship with the English sailors and professor level to leave Canton. And there's a Chinese crew that's like, we have a contract to be on this, to work this ship. But the English sailors are like, we don't want you. You're like dirty and gross and whatever. And they look to Robin to translate, and he's like, well, the Chinese people are right. Like, they do have this contract. But he's like, he said, should he stir up trouble, then the ship might simply leave him behind on shore as well. And so he basically goes against his countrymen and is like, get out of here. It's like immediately he's having to make a choice between the truth or like survival, right? And he's he's screwing over this whole crew kind of without even really intending it.
Yeah. Okay. I found my thing. So you're talking about like complicity. I was thinking more about how, like if you keep the middle class happy, the upper class, like the lower class will never have enough stake in the game to like actually be successful with the revolution. Like I think about that all the time. So like, I wrote, here's the quote. History isn't a pre-made tapestry that we've got to suffer, a closed world with no exit. We can form it, make it. We just have to choose to make it. And then I wrote down, Robin's privilege is such an interesting aspect of this novel. I think he's supposed to exemplify middle-class behavior, because this is also during the time like when the middle class is actually taking root in England as a result of the Industrial Revolution, and the mix of guilt and being radical in theory, yet not taking action that goes out of one's way. So just the idea that like he realizes that he benefits from all of this. He benefits from the world that he is brought into. And then throughout the book, like tries to figure out his role is in that. And I think that there was a conversation with Anthony and Lety toward the very end. God, Lety is the worst. Every time she spoke, I was like, I mean, I get why she exists. I understand her character, but she was so terrible. Let me see if I can find this quote real fast about.
Is it on page 520? Because I think it might be the one that where it's about the train. It's like, you're on a train that you can't jump off. Don't you see? This can't end well for anyone. Liberation for us means liberation for you as well. Or, said Lety, it'll just keep going faster and faster, and we'll let it, because if the train's speeding past everyone else, we may as well be riding it.
That is not the one that I have, but that's so good. But I think it might be near that, because it says, mine is, there are no kind masters, Lety, Anthony continued. It doesn't matter how lenient, how gracious, how invested in your education they make out to be. Masters are masters in the end.
Yeah, there's no, and someone put in the chat way earlier on, like, is there a way, can capitalism be ethical? Like, we're actually having this debate right now, right? I mean, as a Taylor Swift fan, right? There's this ongoing debate about, can you be an ethical billionaire? And it's like, can anyone be a billionaire and have done it without like doing some shady things or putting themselves way above other people or whatever? And it's like, we're having this discussion, right? Or this thought right now of like, how much wealth can one person have before it's like, you're now automatically a bad person? Like, whether maybe you're a really nice guy, but you're the CEO of United Healthcare, and everyone's like, what you represent is this thing that we're not okay with. Like, right? It's like, at what point do you lose any sort of humanity? Oh,
yeah. And I don't think that there are any ethical billionaires, and I'm sorry that you love Taylor Swift and that she's a billionaire.
I don't think so either. No, I don't think so either. And I think it's like, I just think it's the idea, like, the idea that you can't be half in, like with Robin, like he has to make a choice eventually. Like you can't be like a scholar at Babel and also be part of the revolution. Like you're still like, there's a really good quote, and it's like, neutrality is like the side of the oppressor. Basically, it's like to be neutral is to side with the oppressor. Like, if you're like, I'm neutral, then you're basically saying what's going on right now is fine with me. You either have to be like, because it doesn't do anything. So being neutral, it doesn't help anybody. Actually, it just helps the people in power, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Lety is Galinda. Wait, you haven't seen Wicked yet?
I've seen the play.
Oh, Lety is Galinda. She's like the white woman who's trying but doesn't quite get it. Because she's really.
Would you say that Lety tried?
What?
Would you say that Lety tried? I don't think that Lety ever tried.
Emily, I have a lot of sympathy for Lety, and I hate her, but I have a lot of sympathy for her because in some ways I'm like, ooh, I sometimes am her, or I have been her. I think most white women, if we're honest with ourselves, probably have. I hate her, and I like to think that I push against my inner Lety, but like, I think she tried the best she could. I think like within her own worldview, she's like, okay, well, the fact that I'm even friends with these people who everyone else is being terrible to means I'm a good person, right? Mm-hmm. And then and the fact that I'm helping them in these ways that totally goes against what I should be doing means I'm a good person. Like, she's just constantly trying to prove she's on the right side, like she's a good person. But like she never tries to understand what's actually going on. She's just constantly going like, what decision makes me good? Which is like understandable, because also as a white woman, she's like, well, I know oppression because I'm a woman, right? And I've had this dad who was terrible to me and he loved my brother more. But it's like not realizing, I don't know. Man, there's so much in her that I like understand. I don't agree with, but I very much understand.
I think that she was also only friends with them though, because she was how many women were there at Babel? There was like 4 total. Yep. So she and Lety she and Victoire were in the same class. So like, of course she's going to be closer to her at first and then just like by default. But I think, the interplay of race and ethnicity in this book too was also so smart. Mm-hmm. And gender, race, and ethnicity and all that.
Yeah, I think it's like Lori's saying performative allyship. Like but again, like I think in her worldview, she is good and she's doing the right thing because her worldview is so limited. And she's like, well, no one else will even treat these people like equals, and I see them as my best friends and I love them. Mm-hmm. So like, how could I be hurting them too? Right? It's like well, I have Black friends argument, where it's like, well, but that doesn't mean that you're not, like, it's her not being able to see the system. Where did I see? I kept in like the last 20% of the book, Emily, I kept wanting to just shout the Monty Python quote that's like, now we see the violence inherent in the system. Like, yes. help, I'm being oppressed. Where did, oh no, I don't know where the quote is. She says, oh, go ahead.
No, I just was going to have a question about, like, then how do you explain Lety's turn on them at the very end? Because I saw that coming, I mean, from the first time they introduced her as a character. But, like, how would you reconcile? Like, is it just because she wanted to keep her privileged status and position that she told on the society?
I think she's thinking, okay, and this is where I want to find the quote. It's like, it's impossible when you're trying to explain like systemic oppression and they're thinking in terms of individual opportunities. That's like the quote I'm trying to find, where it's like Lety only sees things. She's like, well, everyone has a chance. Like everyone gets to make their own decisions, and like can't see the system. So with her, it's like, she sees it as a group of individuals. Well, these are my friends, and what they're about to do is going to get them probably killed. So I'm going to go tell on them, and I'm going to stop this to save them. Right? Like, that's her limited point of view, and she thinks she's doing the right thing because from her point of view, it's like, well, I'm saving my friends from this thing they're going to ruin. But it's like, but she doesn't zoom out and see how any of it connects, or how, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sympathetic. I understand, right? It's like if you see everything as like, she's a white woman, so like she understands oppression to an extent, but she also has enough avenues to where it's like, well, if she works hard enough and if she does the right thing, she can make it. And so it's like impossible for her to see that there's like no way for Rami to ever make it, or there's no way for Victoire to ever make it, you know?
Okay, so it's been a couple months since I've read this book, but didn't she go into the library? Didn't she shoot Anthony?
Rami.
She shot Rami. But she goes back into the with a gun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I don't know. Again, I just finished this yesterday, so it's still fresh. So you've like really you've had time for it to sink in, but then I'm fresh. But like, yeah, so she goes in, she brings basically the cops, and she comes in, and there is shooting, but then definitely like she's staring right at Rami and she shoots him. And that I think is like such a great discussion of like, why did she shoot him?
Because she loved him and he will never love her back.
Yeah, I think it's there's like this deep-seated like, how dare you who are beneath me not choose me, right? It's that she's still at the end is like, can't understand. There was a whole part of my notes where I just put ugh, white women, Lety. And it says on black women at the very end, it says at the very end, when Victoire is like off on her own, let me just make sure, I just want to read. It's like literally on maybe the very last page. And I thought, as a white woman, this is a very interesting thing to think about. She says, Lety, she knows, cannot allow her, Victoire, to roam free. Even the idea of Victoire is a threat. It threatens the core of her very being. It is proof that she is and always was wrong. And I'm like, we've been seeing this, right? Like the relationship between white women and black women in our society being this really tense, sometimes alliance, sometimes not. And like white women just never quite getting it. And like black women being like, my existence, like me talking to you in this way as like an equal is in some ways, it's a threat. Like it's going to make you uncomfortable just because, I don't know, I can't like even put words to it, but I thought that was such an interesting thought that like Lety was never going to be able to fully see any of them as like equal to her. Because if she did, then like her whole world fell apart.
Yeah. Okay. Comment and a question.
Yes.
Comment first. I think it is, we have been talking a lot about Lety in this story, like in our little book club, which I just like, I mean, we're white women, so I get it. But I also think that is very interesting that like, we are not talking about the other main characters, all of which are people of color. We're just talking about like the one rich white girl. And
come on, Emily, you're right. Yeah.
Is so, and I had this question throughout the book too. When Rami and Victoire and then Robin join Hermes, like they don't know that each other is in Hermes until they find each other that one day. And why is that the case? Why would they not all know that they're all part of the same society? Like why would they keep that separate and not, because I mean, I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know why that was there.
That was really interesting because I think that shows like how uniquely alone they each felt. Like that Robin was like, it must be me that I'm this like ungrateful person who's maybe not super okay with all the things that are happening to me. Like it's like they've each been so convinced that it's them and like their fault that they're not just like super grateful and happy, that I think the idea that they're actually right and that like, no, almost anyone in their position would feel the same way. You know what I mean? Because if they thought that, then he would have been like, I got to tell Rami. I got to tell Victoire. But like, because he thinks it's his fault and he's this like outlier, he's like, I can't tell anyone else. I can't risk like these friendships because they're just gonna, there's no way they'll get it. Even though like, of course they do. You know?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go to my few. Okay, I just said I love Rami. Just a few, like a love letter to Rami. He's so funny.
He's so sweet. Best part of the book.
Then whenever people would teach him about India or Islam, there was a part where he was like, very illuminating, said Rami. I never knew. Like when people are saying like, oh, it's because Indian people like to sit cross-legged on the floor. It's more comfortable for them. And he's like, huh, I didn't know that. Like, it's so well written. And there's a moment when Lety is like, oh, Calcutta, my dad was stationed in Calcutta. And he goes, lovely, could be he pointed a gun at my sisters once. And then just like keeps eating his food or whatever. And I'm like, oh, he's so good.
Funny and so sharp. Yep.
Okay. Let me see. Before we get to just like, oh, go ahead.
Well, maybe this is like a good tie-in to like the last section of the book. So the other reason why I really like this book is because I took 2 grad classes at Oxford. And I stayed at Exeter, and I literally looked at the map that's in the front page, and Babel would have been right next to the college that I studied at. And I was like, this is so precious. But whenever they would describe the city, like Oxford as a city compared to everything else that was going on in England, I also thought that that was unique and interesting because it was this little place that was so hidden and protected from what the rest of the world was doing. And like, unless they ventured out or went on their sea trips, oh my God, we have to talk about what happens when they get back to Oxford after their all of them come back from Asia. But yes. I just think that she did a great job of portraying like Oxford is kind of like the city on a hill that is, you can choose to be ignorant of the rest of everything, their lives in academia. Mm-hmm. But when you take steps to go see what actually is happening in the rest of the world, then you can't unsee it. And I just thought she juxtaposed those things really well.
Yes, like that Babel or Oxford is literally the ivory tower. It's like, yes, yep, you can stay there your whole life and you could just read your books and whatever. Yeah, so let's fully go full spoiler alert. Just full on spoiler alert. You have now been warned. Yeah, the moment that Robin kills his dad, I was like, oh, okay, here's the plot. Like, yep. And again, I now really appreciate all the buildup and stuff, but that first half or so was very hard for me where I was like, okay, there's lots of fun facts about words, but like, I didn't know where we were going. And then as soon as that happens, I was like, oh, now we're in not a different book, but just like, so yeah, what I loved putting, it's my favorite moment in historical fiction, when you take a fictional person, Robin, and insert him very well into a very real event, which was the translation between the British trade officials and Lin, the like Chinese commissioner. Him being like at that conversation translating is like, I've told you that if I could time travel to one moment in time, it would be the moment when Cortez and Montezuma met and Melisende was in the middle translating.
Yes.
That's like my literal time travel. Like, I want to see a moment. It's that. So this was so exciting and interesting to me that like, he's the one that's there because that whole interaction was very real. In fact, I felt really smart, Emily. I'm going to brag for a second.
Please do.
Because there was a part where in the book, Lin, the Chinese commissioner, is talking to one of the British trade officials. And I go, wow, this sounds really familiar. It sounds almost like the letter that the Chinese wrote to Queen Victoria. And then like 2 paragraphs later, it was like we said in our letter to Queen Victoria. And then they like quoted a few other things. And I was like, look at me recognizing. Because it was like, this, if you're a teacher and you're teaching the Opium Wars, you have to teach this letter. There's this letter from Lin, the commissioner, to Queen Victoria, and it's like a masterclass in persuasive writing. It's like, since you're a Christian, we trust that you would never want to hurt us on purpose. You must not know how harmful this drug is. It's like, it's so well done. So anyway, that whole moment I thought was really interesting. And him burning all the opium, that was real. That really did happen. And that sort of does launch these like, you know, opium wars. What do you find interesting about that trip or about what happens when they come back?
Okay. I wanted to say this about once he killed his dad. There's this quote that says, something did not seem right. Robin could tell from Victoire and Rami's faces that they thought so too. It took him a moment to realize that what it was that grated on him, and when he did, it would bother him constantly now and thereafter. It would seem a great paradox, the fact that after everything they had told Lety, all the pain that they had shared, she was the one who needed comfort.
I have that one too.
This like goes back to Lety, and I get that. But I think their plan, just like the whole like ship ride back after the dad dies. And then when they go back and they're like, oh, he's sick, he's just not feeling well, he's just like staying at his country home, is so dumb. Like, it just was, and I get it because they're kids and that's probably what they could have come up with. But when I was reading it, I was like, this is not how you handle killing someone and then like also trying to come back and act like he's like alive somehow. Like, there are just so many other lies that you could have told.
Yes. To me, there were 2 thoughts. One is like, oh my God, it was so much easier to get away with stuff before the 1900s. Just like, when I read like Devil in the White City about the serial killer in Chicago, I'm like, oh my God, it was so easy to murder people like not that long ago, right? Before DNA and before whatever. But I loved the moment when they have this whole plan. And I'm a little bit of when I read books, I'm a little bit of a naive. I just sort of trust the characters. I just like kind of trust that, like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. So I did not think that way. I was like, yeah, sure. Say he's sick. Okay, whatever. Who's gonna know? And then there was a moment when they get that back to Babel and they're like maybe walking into a party, and all of a sudden Robin's like, wait, this is so dumb. Why are we here? Like, why did we come back here? And it made me laugh so hard because I was like on that. I was like, wait, yeah, this is really stupid. What are they doing? Like, I love the like logistics of stuff like this of like, yeah, you panic. What do? You're like, I don't know, maybe we just go back for a while and figure it out. And then you realize like you're in too deep and you're like, oh no, this is really stupid. Like, I think we're in a lot of trouble. I don't know.
It just seems like because this was prior to DNA or any kind of like modern communication, they could have just told people he fell sick and then died, or like he's just back in China still. And like they came up with this whole story, which is so silly. So that was my one critique was that, I mean, I understand why it happened for the plot point. However, I disagree.
But if there is a little sub theme, it's that it's RF Kuang dunking on scholars and how useless scholars are in the real world.
Yes.
Because like the whole revolution part where it's like we showed up to take the tower and no one knows what to do, and they're talking about the like moment where the one guy like tries to grab his leg, but like it's like a slow-mo fight. Like it's just a bunch of nerds being like, is this a revolution? Like, what are we doing? So I think that's like, that was very like honest though. It was like, oh yeah, these are a bunch of nerds who sit around and talk about etymology all day. They don't know the real world at all. Like they don't understand how to do any of this. And that's what made it very realistic. And same thing, like when we get to the final part, when they get to the final part where they're like in the tower and things aren't going well. Again, I'm a very naive reader. I mostly read like very optimistic like books where it all works out in the end. So it was kind of fun for me too, because I was like, oh, this seems like it's going well. And then all of a sudden when the like worker guy, Abel, who joined them was like, hey, this is over. Like you've lost. I was with Robin too. I was like, wait, but we're still here, and like Westminster fell, and it seems like logically we should be winning. And he's like, but you're not. Like it's over. It's done. I don't know. I really appreciated how real this whole story felt. That like, yeah, this is how most revolutions go, and most revolutions become little footnotes in books. And like, hopefully over time, there's enough of them that they build sort of this momentum. But yeah, like this isn't going to be this huge, I don't know, like this huge heroic thing. It's like, yeah, they did their thing. It kind of worked. It mostly didn't. But they have to trust that it like moved something in the right direction.
Yeah, I remember getting to like the last 50 pages of the book and there was still no resolution. And I was like, oh, we're almost done with this book. What does this mean? Like, how is this all going to end?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So let me see. There were a few things I wanted to go back to and mention. Okay.
And I have a question for you too.
Oh, okay. So yes, I want to think. Okay, I want to think about their fates. So like, the fact that Lety's fine makes sense.
Yeah.
Lety's just fine. Rami gets murdered by Lety makes perfect sense to me because he was like the least willing to play the game.
Yeah.
Right? Like he was the one that always had like sarcastic comments, and he was never, again, I think people in the chat got it totally right. It was like, why aren't you thankful for me? Like Lety being jealous. The fact that he's the one that gets murdered makes sense to me. I'm surprised. Actually, I'm not. It makes perfect sense to me then between Robin and Victoire, like the decisions they make to either stay in the tower or leave. Does it make sense to you?
Why does it make sense to you?
Like, it makes sense to me that Robin is ultimately a coward. And is like, well, I'm going to do the right thing, but like, I don't think he's doing it for the right reasons. Like, I think he's doing it because he's a coward and because he doesn't actually know how to like continue. And he's like, well, do this thing. I'll make this big brave stand and I'll die here. Right. And be sort of the martyr. I think he's doing it more out of like fear, which seems to have mostly motivated him throughout the whole thing. Is like, it's not till he's pushed. Whereas Victoire to me is like the bravest. Mm-hmm. And I think it's much braver to like try to survive than it is to like be a martyr, you know? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Huh. Yeah. I wonder if he felt like he had no way out because he had killed his dad and everyone knew about that. And I mean, I think she does a good job of talking, and we've talked about this so far, of like, what would life look like for them after? Like, yeah, life wouldn't continue if he stayed there, especially like as a Chinaman somewhere half in the middle. Like, how would he play any of that out? And especially like once, yeah, I guess he had like to die would be the easiest option with the world, like with the world that he had created for himself of killing his dad and then being kind of the root of this whole uprising.
Yeah, but like, why wouldn't the most useful thing to be like, I'm going to go to Canton and I'm going to like, now that I know what I know, I'm going to go to Canton, my homeland, and I'm going to like use my skills to like continue to try to prevent this thing from happening that I know that's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what Victoria's like, it's sort of you only needed really one person to stay in the tower, or you only needed a few people to stay in the tower for it to work. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting how many of them chose, that the two younger chose and that Robin chose to stay. I think white professor chose to stay, which makes sense. Like, what are they going to do? And again, like Cynthia's asking a great question. It's not, I don't know that actually it was an option, but it wasn't. I mean, Victoire didn't have other real options either, but she left and she's like, I'm going to try. And I think about the fact that Victoire ended up in the United States in like the 1840s. And is probably going to be there right at the moment of the like rise of the huge abolitionist movement and the Underground Railroad. And like, because she chose to try to survive, she's there for, I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like Victoire was like the hero.
Yes, obviously.
Obviously.
Which I love that she made a black woman a hero. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and listen, I don't think he would have been able to go back to Canton and fit in, but like to me, and again, I'm, Monday morning quarterbacking or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, if you feel totally idealistically, can he get on a ship? Can he meet with Lynn, who now knows him? Can he be like, I have all this information about like what they're trying to do. Let me try to print it for you. Like, let me try to get the information out there to the world, like what the British were trying to do so that they can't do it to other people. I think just like dying in the tower when he's like one of the only people now that has this skill to like cross these two cultures is such a shame.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Okay. A few other question? Oh yeah, what's your question?
Okay. This book has a subtitle, and it is On the Necessity of Violence, or The Necessity of Violence. And I wanted to talk to you about so there's a quote that says I think Griffin says, I think decolonization must be a violent process.
Must be a violent process.
Which, like, from a history perspective, like we know exactly how that has turned out in history, and then it ends very violently. And I just want to know your thoughts on that subtitle.
Yes. Okay. In my notes, I put, why did I not realize the full title was Babel or the Necessity of Violence? And yes, that to me was maybe the best part was this ideological debate around violence and nonviolence and like all the different appropriate ways to resist is such an interesting discussion. In my head, I was like, have you seen Black Panther?
Yeah.
This is like Black Panther, right? It's like Griffin is Killmonger or whatever. And Anthony and the other people are Chadwick Boseman, right? Where it's like, no, there's a way to do this. And he's like, no, like they're violent. They stole, they murdered. We have to steal. We have to murder. Like that's the only language. I think even at some point in the book, she says like the only language Empire understands is the language of violence. Like you can't do it any other way. I put in all caps Griffin's entire monologue on pages 396 to 397. So let me just see. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but where he basically says, he's like, it starts with like, our father was a cruel, selfish man who thought anyone who wasn't white in English was less than human. Like he lists out all the reasons why his dad deserved to die. And then it's like, the thing about violence is that the empire has a lot more to lose than we do. Violence disrupts the extractive economy. The problem is that we're living like we've lost. Violence is the only language they understand because their system of extraction is inherently violence. It shocks the system, and the system cannot survive the shock. You have no idea what you're capable of truly. You can't imagine how the world might shift unless you pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, willingness to do violence is maybe the only thing that actually, like, not necessarily violence, but willingness to do violence might be the only thing that actually leads to like real change in this type of situation. What do you think?
Well, someone in the chat just put like MLK versus Malcolm X, and we always talk about the difference between the two of them because history books like to never talk about Malcolm X and what he did because we like to focus on the non-violence of MLK because that makes us sound better and does not maybe inspire people to violence in the way that Malcolm X would. But then when you think about revolutions throughout history, revolutions are like the French Revolution. I taught in my AP Euro class this last week, and it was ridiculous. But then like when you think about the July 1830 revolution, which is when they deposed the monarch again, like it was violent. I mean, they're all like, they're violent. And I honestly think that they should be.
The way when I teach Malcolm X and MLK, I always make the point, I say, here's my thesis to my students. I'm like, you can disagree with me, but this is my overarching argument is that without Malcolm X, MLK wouldn't have been successful. Without the threat of violence,
without the threat of violence. Yeah.
Like you can literally go and look at the debates around passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And you can see that the moment that Malcolm X enters the stage and he's left the Nation of Islam and he's starting to be like more mainstream, we listen to his speech, the ballot or the bullet. And he's like, listen, it's your choice. Give us the ballot or you'll get the bullet. And that's the moment that a lot of legislatures go, well, let's talk to this Dr. King guy. Right? It's like only knowing that your opponent is willing to commit violence. Without that, like it's not going to change. And I think that's, again, I'm not trying to like get all into current stuff, but I think this conversation around the assassination of this healthcare CEO has been so interesting because there's a lot of people going, whoa. And it's like, well, what do you think it means when people are chanting and saying, eat the rich? And like when people are saying like, we need to like upend this system that's built on like unfairness and death, what does that look like? Like we've tried to do it through lobbying, we've tried to do it through peaceful protests, like, and again, I'm not saying I'm advocating for that specifically, but it's been so interesting to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't love that happened. I don't know. I love that happened in relation to our talking about this book, because I do think that is like a very present, tangible point of how, the systems essentially of oppression, whether that is in Babel or historical England or through modern day big pharma, and how they like squeeze money out of people because they can. Yeah. To what extent can we change that with violence?
Without you got to break a few eggs, right? You got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And it's like, it's all well and good in theory. And this is the part of the book that started to not freak me out, but felt really relatable to me. And this, I hope doesn't sound too self-serving, but like, Emily, you and I have had these conversations as someone who like does put their face out on the internet and say, hi, my name's Emily. And like, I think X, Y, and Z about how we should teach history, about what's happening in politics. There is a moment when Trump won where I started to go, oh, like, do I need to be nervous? I mean, there started to be a moment where I was like, oh, this is all well and good, when I'm like theoretically going, well, this is what I think I should do. And then it's different when people start to be talking about like enemies lists and mass deportations and stuff. And you go, oh, this is real. And there's a moment in the book where I think Robin says, turns out like fighting against empire was quite fun. And then later on, he's like, oh, this had felt like it was an exercise, not real life. And now all of a sudden there's real consequences. And you're like, oh, this is real life. And I thought that was just interesting. One other quote that I want to talk about, and then we can sort of wrap up, is that I think is really relevant to today, is blaming the resistors for the disruption. Like he says, but that's precisely the devil's trick. This is how colonialism works. It convinces us that the fallout from resistance is entirely our fault, that the immoral choice is resistance itself rather than the circumstances that demanded it. So again, to go like, well, why are they violently protesting, instead of going, why was that Black kid unarmed shot by the police? Like going, but why are they looting? Or, but why did they assassinate the CEO? And focusing on that and not, well, why?
The actual problem?
Like, yeah, what about problem? But because it's the system, we sort of ignore it. So like, well, that's just the way it kind of works, right?
Yeah, I said, I guess still related on the subtitle. So like on the necessity of violence to maintain empire. The title seems like it's Griffin's statement, but is it really about the injustice of colonial systems and the violence that propels power and exploitation? It's like violence in all manner, right? Like, yeah, I just, because I mean, if you just relate it to like a Black kid getting shot by the cops, like, yes, we should look at the like systemic reason as to why that happens all the time, and not look at the response to that by people who are like Black folks who are directly impacted by that and who are like very justly like protesting against police violence.
So the last thing that we haven't really, or haven't touched on, then I just want to hear your final thoughts, or maybe like your favorite takeaways from the book. They could be even like fun little facts. Is I thought it was so interesting too that like the answer, if one of the themes of the book was like, it's all about economics, right? Like it's all about money, and like free trade is free trade. It's not about freedom. It's not about the free part. It's about the trade part. It's always about the money, whatever. That like the solution had to be about money too. I thought was really interesting that like, it says like, there's all these arguments about like abolition came so that the English could edge out France out of the global markets. Like it didn't come because people all of a sudden decided slavery was bad. It was because of money. And even in like their rhetoric, he's like, we must simply make this a war of class instead of race. And there was another quote that said, for that was the key. For this to work, they had to frighten the rich and the powerful. So again, it's like the violence had to be against the economy, right? Like they have to take down, like just killing the prime minister, let's say, isn't going to do anything. You just replace another prime minister. You have to like violently take down the whole economy. You have to like let Westminster fall, because that's the only thing that's motivating. You can't just stand up and say, but this is terrible, and look at what's happening to these people. Like no one cares, or no one cares enough to do anything.
Yes, because, and that would again also get everyone else in England, right, on board, or like understand what's going on in Oxford. It had to be something radical enough that would cause people to actually watch and look, and also like honestly cause the middle class the most strife, because the upper class can do whatever they want, but if the middle class is the one that's then being impacted, they're like, oh, what's going on here? Because
they had to make it about white workers' jobs. This silver that's fueling this war, whatever, is also bad for white workers' jobs back home. It can't be about some foreign people abroad. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Final thoughts, takeaways, questions.
I loved it. It's the best book I've ever read.
Oh, I think this will be a classic. I think like I can see in 100 years it being like, oh, this is like an early 21st century classic. Yes. And I loved it. And I'm not sure that I'd read it again, which I reread books a lot, but I loved it and think everyone should read it. I think my advice to people who are not like nerdy enough to be here right now, I guess, would be like, to not be afraid to skim the first 20% of the book. And I don't mean skim in a bad way. I mean like skim all the cute little etymology lessons and stuff, because if you're not Emily Neinast, then it can get, it can I think turn some people off of the book.
I think that my other critique of the book is that sometimes her footnotes were incredibly distracting, but also very necessary. Like it'd get to the point where I would get to the bottom of a page like this right here. And I'd be like, I didn't even see like the little asterisk to go down and read the footnote. And then I'd have to like go back over the page and try to find it again. So, I mean, I thought it was very, like, they were helpful. They were always interesting, but they were sometimes very distracting.
It was also great because she's writing this as a history, because that's, you didn't even get the full subtitle, right? The full subtitle is Babel, or the Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. So she's writing this, if anyone's read Fourth Wing, it kind of gave me those vibes. She's writing this as like, I'm writing this as the history. So a historian is going to put a bunch of footnotes and make sure they're citing their sources. And the fact that she did that and used the footnotes as part of the story, like sometimes the footnotes were real history things, and sometimes the footnote was like, it was like the backstory to like Griffin and I think Evie. There was like a footnote about their relationship where I was like, wow, I kind of loved that part.
Yeah.
But the part that to me just felt, that I felt like very, it gave me lots of feelings, was I loved the part where the one kid in the tower is writing a record. He's like, I want to have a record of all the things we did in this tower during this revolution. And Robin's sort of like, what's the point? And Victoire's like, no, let's do it. And she says, let's see if we can change some future historian's mind. Is like a line I loved. Just this thought of like, let's see if we can leave something that will at least cause future historians to think about us and go, well, maybe they weren't just crazy, violent foreigners. Maybe they were doing something interesting.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Another quote. We've made our marks at Ibrahim. We were already in the history books, for better or for worse. Here's a chance to intervene against the archives. No. And then it later talks about how the record was so blank. Like there was nothing about the Hermes Society in there. And I thought that as a historian, that hit hard, because how many things do we not know because they weren't recorded, or they were recorded and then destroyed?
Yes. Victoire has a quote where she says, I'm just terrified that we'll make this grand statement, but they'll never understand what we meant. And I was like, oh, that's so powerful, right? To be like, it's all, which is worse, to like be totally forgotten or to be totally misunderstood. To be like, oh no, they didn't get it at all. And like, it's like if a tree falls in the woods, right? Like it's like, did it even happen? And of course it did. So the thing that I'll end with is something that I feel like you can probably relate to as well. There was a quote early on when they're just becoming their ultimate Oxford nerd selves and they're like fully in the world of etymology. And Robin says, they could no longer look at the world and not see stories, histories layered everywhere like centuries worth of sediment. And he's talking about how it's almost like their brains weren't functioning. Like they couldn't have a conversation without being like, where'd that word come from? Like they just kept stopping. And I was like, oh, that feels like my brain. And I think probably your brain. Like there are certain things I can't do anymore once you know as much as we know about history. Like I can't watch certain movies without being like, oh, that. I can't like walk down a street in certain areas without noticing like all the things that I know have like made it to this moment. And it's both like so incredible and so exhausting.
Because ignorance is bliss is a quote for a reason. And I think especially in these unprecedented times, like everything that we learn about, everything that we see that's happening in the news, I mean, it's, you have this great quote, Emily, that I now use all the time. Like history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Like
that was Mark Twain, by the way, not me. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm crediting it to you. It is so exhausting to see the trends and the patterns and be like, oh, I've seen this before. Oh, I've seen this before. And just and that's where like our brains immediately go.
Yeah, to Brian's point, like people think it's a fun party trick, and I'm like, no, this is like my curse. That you will. I mean, it's literally why I texted you out kind of out of the blue. We were talking about something else, and literally yesterday, I go, wait, Robespierre. What do we think about him? Because literally, my brain. I think it was because I was reading about this assassination of the healthcare CEO, and I was like, wait. Who's Robespierre? What's Robespierre? Did we misunderstand him? Like, I can't go through 10 minutes of the day without drawing some connection or being like, wait, did we misunderstand? And like the second you decide you want to be sensitive and like really try to fully understand every like viewpoint, which is what we should all do, it's also exhausting. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's so much easier to be ignorant and to be like set in your ways.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying it's so much easier to be Lety, Emily?
It is so much easier to be Lety, and it's why, like, again, it's that inertia. There, again, I'll bring kind of one more quote that says, like, oh no, where did it go? Oh, lack of urgency. Okay. It says, in truth, Robin found it was actually quite easy to put up with any degree of social unrest as long as one got used to looking away. And then later he said he was fine with resistance as long as it didn't hurt him. That one of the themes is like inertia, that just like it's so hard to change a train once it's started moving. It's so hard to like stop it. You have to like have overwhelming force and something massive to stop it, because otherwise most people are just like, yeah, but whatever. Like I remember when I heard how much energy using Chat GPT like one time takes, right? It takes as much like electricity and energy or whatever to run. When you ask Chat GPT to like do some silly little thing, it takes an insane amount of energy. Did you know this? Like the environmental impacts of AI are enormous. We think it's just this like robot in the sky. And it's like, no, there are massive server farms like running this stuff off of energy. And I was like, oh, no one's going to care about that at all. Cause like, it's so fun to just give it a silly little prompt and see what it has to say. Like, unless it's like right in front of us, it doesn't matter. That's a depressing.
That's so true. Yeah. But that's true about like kind of the world that we live in nowadays. Like if it's not right in front of us, if we don't have to think about it, then ignorance will
I'm trying to think of a funny like Rami quote that we can end on, but actually no. Here's an inspiring quote. Because I did think that I liked the power of small acts gaining momentum over time. I liked when Robin was like, well, our revolution is going better because of the many failed little revolutions that came before it, like the Weavers' Revolt and the Luddites and the whatever. And it says, victory is a game of inches, of historical contingencies where everything goes right because they have made it go right. And I thought that was really inspiring, because on the one hand, it's sort of like, oh, this big kind of failed, like maybe it was successful in that moment, but ultimately the British Empire is going to be just fine. Well, I don't know. Did they win or did they lose?
Did the British Empire win?
Like in this scenario, are we to believe that the British Empire was stopped because the tower went down?
No.
Okay, right.
I think that they were wounded, but yeah. Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a great spot to end on too, because it is motivating and encouraging to take baby steps on our own now, because who knows what the future will look like if enough of us do that. One inch at a time.
Yeah, you don't know, right? You don't know, but like this thing that you do right now, you're probably not. Again, I've seen all these people being like, hey, you're probably not going to be the Katniss Everdeen in this story. Like, there's only one. Like, you're probably going to be someone that like no one will learn about in history, but something you did might eventually lead to something someone else does that might allow a future Katniss Everdeen to like set the world on fire. And that's, you know.
Oh, you and your Hunger Games references.
I need to reread those books. I bet they'll hit even harder now. What if I made that my next book club book? Just the original Hunger Games.
I'm like, so many people be on board.
Actually, I might do, like, because I've read it so many times, I might do a little bonus book club that's that, just because I have so much to say about it. But I do want to pick a different book, and I think I know what my next book is going to be, but I'm not 100% certain. Or her new one, maybe she has the new one out. But yeah, maybe I'll do a like Suzanne Collins night, because she's so smart and so wonderful at some point. But Emily, thank you for joining me, and thank you for kind of pushing me to read this book, because it was really good, and it got me out of, I've been reading a lot of like wonderful romances that are so good, but they don't make me think at all, and this made me think a lot.
Yeah.
So
this one, I had to read this one more slowly than I wanted to, because it was one of those like, oop, that was a lot of information that I now need to process through and put it down, and then I'll come back to it when I'm ready again.
Yes, totally. And thank you everyone who joined in the chat. It was so wonderful, like seeing everyone's comments flowing through, and I'm really glad that you joined. And just follow along. I'll announce my next book soon, at some point, probably before the new year. But I have to, there's a few that I'm reading simultaneously, and I need to figure out which one makes the most sense. Yes, get a hard copy of this because it's really a book that like needs to be highlighted. And this conversation is going to be saved on my YouTube channel. So if you want to send it along to someone else who missed it, but you think would really enjoy our conversation, it'll be on my YouTube channel kind of forever in theory. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.